Great day, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to the Strategic Possibilities Show, where we discuss success and growth to help you launch potential in your personal and professional life. My name is Emmett Ferguson, and I am your host. And today I have an amazing creative guest that has turned his creative passions, his writing and everything, into a business for himself. And his name is John Grgurich. He's been writing since he was 13 years old, and he's got articles, creative novels, poems. And I brought John on today to share with us a little bit about the creative process and how he's had an opportunity to turn it into a business and a career for himself. Hey, John, can you tell us a little bit about how you got started in writing?
Well, that's a good question. Like I said, I've been writing since I was 13. I have always had a very vivid imagination, and initially started writing like little stories here and there, like when I was a teenager, and then later on, I started getting into science fiction, and I fell in love with Star Trek and Star Wars, and then in high school, I really loved the Twilight Zone. And so I started writing stories that are very similar to that. And then, eventually, I went into college and I started thinking about what I wanted to do. And I started studying computer programming. Initially I started studying business. Well, actually, no, I take that back. I started out as a music major, did that briefly because I've been a musician pretty much most of my life. And then I decided that wasn't practical, so I decided to go into business. Actually, I had an MIS major, and then I switched over to computer science, and I started studying computer programming. Did that for a couple of years, decided I hated that, and then eventually I started studying writing. And so I took my technology background and sort of incorporated that into my fiction. So I started writing like tech-based science fiction, kind of like cyberpunk. Then after school, I worked as a computer technician, got out of that, and then sold insurance for a while. And then eventually I saw that there was a market for people who need like content for websites, blog posts, SEO copywriting. And I was thinking, I think I can do that. So initially it was just going to be a part-time thing, and it just grew into a full-time business.
Very cool. So it sounds like in terms of that cramming your life into just those few moments that you shared with us, and thank you for that. Was it like you went a bunch of different routes and you weren't sure which one to take, or you took a bunch of routes and then you found that some of them just weren't right for you?
Yeah, I took different routes, and then I decided that they wasn't really right for me, but I've kind of managed to, I guess, find a way to, coalesce all those different things about my background into one thing, like technology and writing. I've been toying with the idea of possibly getting into jingles, writing like music for advertising and commercials, because I've been a composer since the late 90s.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I don't hear of many people who want to get into that business. So I imagine that it is a very, a great market if you have the skills and to be able to do that for yourself. So that's awesome. And when it comes to creativity, when it comes to writing things, one thing that really stood out when I was looking at your LinkedIn profile was the fact that you had so many articles, and not only are you a excellent business writer, like writing for professional type articles. I was looking through your articles, writing for highly like professional, like even regulated businesses. But you're also a creative writer. You're a science fiction writer. One of my favorite shows of all time is also Twilight Zone. So where do you get your ideas? Like, is it just like you're sitting there and they just come, or do you find them in real life, or how would you advise someone if you were like, trying to?
I'll tell you, I think it's a combination of different things. Sometimes an idea will pop into my head and I have to let it simmer for a while, and then it might be based on a real life experience or something I heard in the news or whatever, anything. But that's just an idea, In order to develop the idea, I have to sit down and actually do some work, figure out like the characters and the plotting and the outline for the story, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a combination of different things, just spur of the moment, and then also just sitting down and doing the work.
Very nice. And a good story, consists of obviously many factors, whether, and with
Yeah.
Twilight Zone, it comes down to, I think most of them have just a mind-blowing plot twist, or I don't even
Oh,
know if you could call it plot twist, but just like something that's like, wow, that just hits like a,
yeah, that's the thing about the Twilight Zone. It's actually very thought provoking. Like it makes you think about things in a different way.
Right on. So, when you come up with your ideas, and you're starting to outline it and everything, how is it that you transform it into like a compelling story?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. And I guess first I need to talk about the four elements that go into a story: plot, what's the story about; the setting, where does the story take place; character, and then that's who's in the story; and then the thing that really drives a story is conflict. Creating tension in the story. So plot, setting, character, and conflict. And there are two types of conflict. There is internal conflict and external conflict. So internal conflict is something that's happening inside the character, and then external conflict is something that's happening around the character. That's kind of the nuts and bolts of it.
That's great. And okay, so you've got the basic format of the story there. And is there like a common? By the way, do you do coaching? Have you ever coached anybody on writing a?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. I haven't. I've, of course, I never say never, but that's not something that I have any plans to do at the moment. But I guess maybe I've thought about it in passing a few times, but I don't have any real plans to. And no, I haven't really done any coaching.
Okay. Well, just based on maybe things that you've read, obviously Twilight Zone is a masterpiece in itself, but maybe like other stories that you've read. What are some common mistakes that people can make when they're coming up with a conflict or when they're going through that list of pieces of story?
Man, that's actually a really good question. But I think the one thing I see a lot of, or one of the biggest problems I see is dialogue, which admittedly is probably the toughest part of writing fiction, I think, because there's a difference between conversation and dialogue. In conversation, there's a lot of meaningless banter, we call small talk. But in dialogue, it's a little more kind of sort of to the point. There's a lot of that small talk is eliminated. So, I see that a lot, that they try to make it sound like a conversation, but actually you really want it to be more dramatic. You want to be more direct and to the point because, the reader will eventually lose interest.
Okay, so you're saying in fiction books, obviously, like primarily that there's a lot of dialogue that I guess doesn't push the story forward. Like, how do you know the difference if you're writing and you want to try to capture a character or sorry, capture character's
That's
character?
a really good question. I don't think there's any real one rule of thumb. Like one of my favorite authors is William Shakespeare, and no one writes dialogue better than William Shakespeare. And so I guess if you really want to learn how to write dialogue, study William Shakespeare. You don't have to necessarily use the language, but the principle is essentially the same. But you want it to sound interesting, you want it to sound dramatic, but within the context of the story and the genre of the story, because it all really depends on the genre. So there's really no one set rule on how to write dialogue.
Very cool. And I do appreciate that you brought up William Shakespeare because I was just thinking about, what it would be like if William Shakespeare had a keyboard because, on one hand, you've got back in the day, they didn't have any computers and, they had to write every single line painstakingly by hand, whereas today we've got computers. And I wonder, like, if William Shakespeare had a keyboard, would he have put as much effort in every word? And maybe he would have, or would he have pumped out more? Who knows? But
It's
what do you think?
it's really hard to say, but also, I mean, if William Shakespeare were alive today, would he be using the same language that we're accustomed to with Shakespeare? Because don't forget the English language was much different in those days than it is now.
Yeah, right on. And I think he invented like a lot of words, right? Yeah, I
Yeah.
think he invented a lot of words. All right, cool. So you got the Twilight Zone, William Shakespeare, and everything. And in terms of turning it into a business, there's probably a lot of writers out there, and there's so many things that they can improve and ways that they can even apply it to make it a career for themselves, something that they can do. So was there something that helped you really build up the confidence to, go after the businesses and help them Is there something different, or is it just, belief in your skill, or did they see your work or things like that?
Well, I think the hardest part really for me was I had to learn about sales and marketing. So I had to learn a lot about business because it is a business, whether whether you like it or not, because how else can you make money? And there has been kind of a shift in, the way people think. You went from the starving artist to a creative entrepreneur. So, a lot of people are talking about the gig economy, and a lot of that's because people are kind of getting out of the traditional corporate, get a 9 to 5 job, work there for 30, 40 years, get your pension, retire. Well, that model has faded into the sunset, so to speak. So a lot of people aren't seeing the kind of security that they used to see in the corporate world. So they're deciding to start their own businesses. Well, they need to have people to build their website. They need to have people to do the advertising. So they need to hire designers and artists, and they need and writers to get all that done, all because they need those kind of creative assets to make their marketing strategies look interesting. But for me, I had to learn about sales and marketing because I had to learn how to go out and get clients. And that's really, I think, is the hardest thing about it, because you got to be willing to put yourself out there.
For sure. And when you come from a creative background, one of the last things you learn is about sales and marketing. You learn about the strokes for painting, and the formatting
Right.
for text, and how to write a headline, things like that. But you don't really learn that sales and marketing side of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
creatives, that is the last thing we want to do. I'm introverted by nature, but I've had to learn how to be extroverted when I need to. Now I do have a performing arts background, so it's probably a little easier for me because I'm used to being up on stage. But in reality, I'm an introvert. I want to be in my own little shell. So I had to not force myself, but make myself go out into the public. And I go to different events. I do a lot of networking, which is kind of changed a little bit, sort of stopped because of this whole situation. But I'm looking forward to getting back to doing in-person events, because I find that for me to be the most effective.
Fantastic. And when you say most effective, you primarily mean, is it any event, or is it specific, like industry
Well, there's a
events?
different
Or?
there are different types of events. I mean, there are informal mixers. There are also like happy hours and stuff like that. There's workshops. There's lunch and learns. There's different lunch events. Like I think one of the chambers of commerce in Houston, they have something called the Chamber Connections Lunch which they do every month. And then there are different paid networking events. Like I'm part of one that we meet every Thursday morning. So there's really a variety. But so you want to kind of vary a little bit. But for me, the most effective are going to be the informal mixers, because you can get 50 to 100 people in one room, and you can just talk to people.
That's fantastic. And it sounds like that isn't something that's too out of reach for any writer who's looking to make that shift and turn it into a career, right? Like going to an event, and obviously networking in itself, like in an effective way, is something completely different than just going out and, testing out the waters. But thank you for sharing that idea, because I think that is really, really true. And when it comes to writing itself, whether it's fiction or nonfiction for business, or just as an article or something, what would you say is that, say somebody's got mostly fiction, and they love doing fiction, but they want to just get themselves out there. They need to do some writing that can, help businesses, because that's where their money is. That's where they're gonna, be able to feed themselves in many ways. So where would be the shift in how you think of writing for fiction versus how, and I've seen you write so many great business articles, or at least articles for the professional world. Where would you say that shift is? Like, what's the difference, or what's the difference?
The difference, yeah, that's a good question. There is obviously a difference. I think that the difference is that with the articles, you're just presenting information, so it's got to be, direct and to the point. It has to be very conversational, very plain language, that the average person can read and understand. It has to be relatively short, so you have to use shorter paragraphs. Like typically, I try to use bullet points when I can, just because it makes it easier for people to read. Plus, Google likes that as well, just because it's easier to read. Whereas with fiction, it's a little bit different. I think that for me, I think writing the blog posts is easier than writing fiction. It takes a lot less time. Because when I'm writing fiction, I have to do like 5, 6, 7 drafts, or more before the story really starts to take shape. Whereas with writing a blog post, I just write one draft, do an edit, and that's it.
Wow. Okay. So I haven't written too much fiction before. I've tried it, but I haven't gotten into like momentum. So I really appreciate you sharing that idea in the sense that it does take many, many more drafts. And would you say, and just to understand where that comes from, some people, or at least myself, I'm writing, and the thing that can hold me back sometimes is, my inner critic wondering if that sentence is like perfect or not. Right. But since I haven't written fiction, I don't know what that type of thinking is like. So would you say you have to write many drafts in fiction because it's that inner critic, or because it really does take that many drafts just to be able to create that story?
That's actually a good question. And, and I think it's kind of a combination. First of all, you have to be willing to just provides the crap out of it. But as far as like the inner critic, I mean, I guess we all have that, and it's certainly it's certainly valid. I mean, we need that. I think it can also hold us back because, when you're writing, just writing, whatever comes to you, you can always edit later. So I think Yanni kind of put it best. He did a video on the creative process. I'd like to share this. I've been a Yanni fan for like 20 years. And I think he said, I'm trying to remember what he said. He says, the thing about the creative process is that when you're in it, you can't observe it. But while you're observing it, you can't be in it. So like when you're writing, when you're in the creative process, you're just like you're in the moment. You just move with it. You surrender to it. You don't really think about it. You just surrender to it. And then when you come out and you look at what you've done, then you can go through the logistics, make any changes you need to make, and make it and polish it. So I mean, the inner critic is important. We need that, but it can also hold us back.
Yeah. Hey, that is a fantastic quote, because really looking at those moments when you're in the zone, focused on the task at hand,
right?
When you're in that flow state, which there's like a lot of research on that's like a popular topic today, you're just in it. You're not thinking about the complicated, the technical and things. You're really just doing. So that is a great quote. And with that, what else are you working on nowadays, John? Do you have like a book coming out, or is there a specific?
I am working on a couple of books. I haven't had much of a chance to work on it in the last year because I've been so busy. Got they're science fiction novels. Also want to work on a book that I'm going to tell you this. I had a family member that passed away last year after living a long life. And toward the end of his life, like say in the last 15, 20 years of his life, he wrote a lot of stories about growing up, being a World War II veteran, being Pearl Harbor, growing up during the Great Depression. He wrote all this stuff, all these stories, and I want to take those stories and I want to publish them into a book, because I feel like those stories need to be shared.
Wow, that sounds like an ambitious project, and sorry for your loss. And from that, it sounds like you have found some amazing stories to tell. Definitely great that you were able to find that. So how's that coming along? Are you like in the process of outlining, or is that just?
Actually, I haven't even started. I have the manuscripts, the original manuscripts. Because I've just been so busy with stuff, I have really barely had enough time to even look at it. Just because the SEO copywriting keeps me so busy because there's such a huge demand for it, and it's been growing. In fact, I picked up a new client I think last month. I'm waiting to hear back on a major web content project I'm going to be working on hopefully soon.
Very nice. All right. And since you do have that client, I imagine that you'll probably be pretty full with a lot on your plate. But say someone does want to reach out to you and they want to work with you on a writing project, what's the best way to contact you?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can also find me on Twitter. I'm not really sure if I want to give out my phone number, but you can find me on LinkedIn and just reach out to me there, and then I'll look from there. I can give you my direct email and phone number if we feel like we can work together. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn and also on Twitter. But I'm more active on LinkedIn than on Twitter. Twitter is kind of weird. I'm active on both platforms, but most of my engagement's on LinkedIn.
All right. Well, for anyone that is out there, if you want to reach out to John, definitely check out the description below. And if you're looking for him on Twitter, he's Twitter at John, JOHN _ Grgurich. That's John_Grgurich. And he's got some amazing projects coming out, and he's a fantastic writer for businesses and SEO content. So if you need that for your business, check it out. And with that, everybody, you have a wonderful day. And John, do you have anything else?
No, I think it's about it, but I do appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. I appreciate being on the program, and let's definitely keep in touch.
All right. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
All right.